Still a few more. Okay. Hello. Find a seat. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this weekend at the 15th Annual Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. Since 2010, MICE has grown into the largest independent comic show in New England that we know of. I'm Dan Mazur. I am co-founder and programming coordinator of MICE. And I want to welcome you all to TILLIE WALDEN's presentation, Comics and Queerness in Vermont and Beyond. We also want to thank our host, Boston University, for allowing us to have these beautiful spaces and lots of other support, and especially Boston University's visual narrative program. Visual narrative is what you have to say when you want to start a graduate program in making comics, which is what they do. And it's a great program. It's 3 years old, and that coincides exactly with how long MICE has been at BU, so figure it out. MICE is also produced by BCAF, the Boston Comic Arts Foundation, an education-based comics advocacy nonprofit. Discover more amazing comics events at bostoncomicarts.org. And there are some really good ones you should know about if you're a local comics aficionado. If you like MICE, consider supporting us. Donations can be made at the welcome desk and online at miceexpo.org. And if you are in a position to sponsor the show, an entity of that kind, sponsorship is always welcome, and you can find out more at reach out to mice at bostoncomicarts.org. Now, our special featured guest, TILLIE WALDEN, probably requires no introduction, but I'm happy to do it anyway. TILLIE WALDEN won a Eisner Award for her 2017 graphic novel Spinning, and since then has created quite a few more books, including On a Sunbeam, Clementine, a series spun off of the Walking Dead world, and also a series, Junior High and Crush, in collaboration with Tegan and Sarah. And with that, TILLIE WALDEN.
Wow. Whew. All right. Just gonna adjust this. Thank you all so much for coming. I feel like I'm gonna end up talking mostly here, but I'm gonna try and pivot so that everyone feels welcome. This is a talk, Comics and Queerness in Vermont and Beyond. They asked me to come up with a title for this talk, and I just picked some words that apply to me, which is, we're gonna talk about all of it though. So my name is Tillie. As Dan mentioned, I thought I would be wearing a button-down today. I am not wearing a button-down today, so I got that wrong. My hair is also a little longer. I'll update this. But thank you all so much, really, for being here with me today at the end of a convention. It's Sunday. I know everyone's a little tired. I really appreciate you being here. The topic of this talk, comics, queerness, that little drawing, that's Vermont. I realize we're in Massachusetts, but we're close enough. Just roll with me here. But all of these things really sum up a lot about who I am. I'm a cartoonist. I draw and write graphic novels. I've published a lot of books that have covered a wide range of topics, but they really all have the unifying theme of queerness. Being gay has influenced my life and art in a lot of ways. I never set out to make a lot of books about queerness specifically, but when I create a character, it's very automatic. They're just suddenly gay because oftentimes my characters reflect me. I think straight authors do it too, but it's sort of more assumed with straight authors that's just how it goes. Yeah, of course their character's straight. And I think sometimes people are like, wow, a lot of your characters are gay. Sometimes, wait, every character in your books, and I've done 15 books, but it's the norm for me. This is a reference to the moment that I realized I was gay when I was 5, when a teacher assistant helped me. This is so beautiful. She told me to hold on to my sleeve while I pulled my jacket on. I thought it was the most intimate thing anyone had ever told me. I still think about her every time I put on a jacket. But I digress. I should find her. Maybe she's here. I don't think she's here. We were talking about comics, queerness, and then Vermont. And I usually give this talk in Vermont, which is why I'm pointing to the ground. But this ground is Massachusetts, but that's okay. Vermont comes up because it is my home. And even when my book is not set in Vermont, the landscapes I draw are very, really pretty much end up looking like Vermont regardless, because it's what I'm seeing outside my window when I draw every day. Now, being gay was not a choice, but being a cartoonist was, and I'll admit it is an odd one. Most kids do not go up to their parents at 17 and say, I'm not going to college because my destiny is to be a cartoonist, and this is a kid who has not really drawn any comics before or ever expressed interest in being a cartoonist once. But that's what I did, and it begs the question, where did this come from? How does one become a cartoonist? First part, grow up reading comics. That's a huge part. I loved Calvin and Hobbes. I loved Nancy. I loved Inuyasha. I read a ton of manga growing up, obviously. Who didn't? Stories full of action, adventure, and romance. For those who don't know, manga refers to comics made in Japan, published over here in English. These are like vast, long series, characters that you will fall in love with. And I read American comics, but there really was something about manga that very much defined who I am as a cartoonist. And there also is something about manga that I think deeply connects with young kids who are realizing they're queer. Anyone who has experienced that knows what I'm talking about, but there is something about these stories that was like a cold drink of water after like a long PE class. They just like they really connected with me. And I'm so glad that manga was a part of my childhood. And I still did read American comics. I was very lucky to grow up in what is basically like a graphic novel renaissance. For those who don't know, a quick lesson on the history of comics, just so you know how we got here to this whole like Renaissance comics situation. We spent a long time in newspapers before we became floppy and superpower based. Newspaper comics, they were political and they were funny, but they were an art. They were beautiful. And if you've never spent time looking back at Sunday pages from the 1900s and onward, you should look, because this is our history. This is where we come from, especially in American comics. And I think it's just a fabulous start to what we do. This led to the Golden Age. So around World War II, we begin to see the rise of the superhero. We all know, we've heard of superheroes. But not everyone knows that comics were used for political purposes, like recruiting men for the army, which I don't see the army here. They're not doing that anymore. Hello, army, I'm great at drawing. But this is when we start to see, it's the Golden Age, right? We know what gold means. It's beautiful and it's great. This is when we start to see longer stories. We see more narrative, we see a lot of action, we see a lot of excitement, and comics really seemed in these years to be like on the up and up. Everything was gonna be great. Things did not turn out great because everything changed in the Silver Age. So in the 1950s, this is a piece of comics history that's very important that not a lot of people know about. But this is when we first start to see censorship in comics. So a psychiatrist, not a good guy, published a book called Seduction of the Innocent, claiming, it's a real book, that comics were a corrupting influence on the youth. And it genuinely created a panic. Like, it really scared people. And this is where the idea began that comics are not real reading. And whenever you hear someone say that, remember that this is where it started, way back when. This idea that comics are not wholesome, comics are trashy, comics are junky. It all started here. And this created such a panic, there was even a Senate hearing about it. Like, the Senate was concerned about cartoonists. They had bigger fish to fry, obviously. But what happened after the Silver Age is comics obviously persevered. And when people censor you, you go underground. And this is why we get underground comics. So this is when more women, more people of color, more queer people are all starting to get involved. And it's not to say, though, that people from marginalized groups had not actually been there all along. One of the earliest and most incredible comic strips was made by George Harriman, Crazy Cat and Ignatz, who was a mixed-race man from Louisiana. Not a lot of people realize he was mixed race. His portrait was taken in a way to sort of help him pass as white, but he's a huge part of comics history. And even though they weren't technically cartoonists, women have been illustrating sequential stories for decades, for a very long time. Beautiful sequential stories, but they're picture books. And because they're made for children, a lot of times the mastery is not as acknowledged. And I think that even in the history of picture books, like everyone probably knows that Eric Carle did The Very Hungry Caterpillar, but I don't know how many people know that Margaret Wise Brown did Goodnight Moon. Like, are these names staying in our minds as much? But I think that thinking about the history of picture books and the history of visual narrative is so linked to comics. We're all using pictures to tell stories. It doesn't matter if our audience is a 3-year-old or a 30-year-old. It's all beautiful. It's all incredible. And this all leads us to, after the underground movement in the 80s and 90s, here come graphic novels. We're here. Hi, guys, graphic novels. So we get Mouse by Art Spiegelman. Don't debate me. We could talk about Will Eisner. Yes, also arguably the start of the graphic novel, but we don't have time to get in the weeds. I'm supposed to be talking about queerness. I'll get there, don't worry. But this is when this really beautiful thing happened, and this is the only reason I have a job today, is comics used to be sold in comic book stores, and now they're in bookstores. Like indie bookstores selling the hottest fiction where you get your Sally Rooney, they have a graphic novel section. This has given comics such legitimacy to be amongst books. It means that the comic industry is also the book industry. And this is how all of these graphic novels have come about. It's why we're getting paid more. It's why we have jobs. And this is where we get all of these incredible creators. So from 2000 onward, it has just been year after year of bangers, honestly. It is so many amazing graphic novels and creators are out there. And I'm specifically thinking more about what I call the indie space, basically anything that isn't Marvel or DC. But we're seeing comics of all sizes, of all subject matter, being published and distributed all over the place. They're being translated. It is like there is so much incredible stuff happening in our industry right now. And alongside all of this, mainstream recognition, literary recognition, is only like just beginning. Comics are not taken seriously as fine art, and we are also not really taken seriously as literature. It is just beginning to change. The first time a comic won a Newbery Award was in 2019. The Man Booker Prize, the first time a comic was ever longlisted, a comic has never won it, was in 2018. And the first time a graphic novel won the National Book Award was in 2016. This is pretty recent. And it's not like incredible books have not been around, it's just they're not being acknowledged as they should be. But I was very lucky to be swept up in my early years in this wave of all of these comics. I was able to go to Barnes & Noble and buy manga, but also look at the graphic novels and see stories. I didn't have to be the first lesbian to make a graphic memoir. Thank you, Alison Bechdel. I was like, cool, this path has been charted. I can just walk along it and do my own thing. Although I'm gonna do a few less words than you, Alison. I'm not as smart as you. Alison's great, obviously. But it takes me all the way back to a question that I didn't really answer, which is, how did I become a cartoonist? Like I said before, I read a lot of comics. I like to draw. I like to write a little, but I never felt particularly good at either. But what's great about this is you do not have to be good at something to fall in love with it. I got really lucky. I was just a normal, completely depressed 16-year-old. As you are, and my dad signed me up for a comics class because he wanted to take it. Because my dad loves Scott McCloud, because all the people who worked in early computers and programming all read Scott McCloud's book in the 90s. I don't know why, but they did. And so my dad was always just like, Scott McCloud, Scott McCloud, Scott McCloud. And I was like, stop. I want to think about my manga. I don't want to think about Scott McCloud. But my dad was like, I signed you up for this class. And I was like, you didn't. And I had to take it because you're 16 and you still kind of do what your parents say. I thought this was going to be a waste of my time. I was very busy being obsessed with my own tragedy. And here I am in this class full of adults, and Scott says, make a comic. And I was like a little agog. I was like, excuse me, make a comic? Like, I don't know how to draw. And Scott was like, it doesn't matter. Just make a comic. It's okay. And so I did. And I drew the comic, sort of agonizing, but I did it. And Scott looked at it. And then he looked at me. And he said, this is really good. Here's the thing. It was not really good. I have looked back at that comic. He was lying. It was a mess. It made no sense. It was about a boy becoming an octopus. Didn't make any sense. But it didn't matter, because at this time in my life, I came from the world of competitive figure skating. Most adults were not very nice to me. And most people, I had to earn a compliment with like 5 years of hard labor. And then they'd say like, that was pretty good, but your leg wasn't straight, stuff like that. And Scott just immediately was like, this is good, you're good. And then he said, you should make more comics. So, because one guy was nice to me, I am here, 15 graphic novels deep. Thanks, Scott. He is the nicest man. He said you should make more comics to everybody, but I didn't notice. I really thought it was just for me. I really did. And I went home so inspired because I was like, he told me I'm good at this. I'm going to make more comics. And I did. I went home. I started drawing them. And that's when I realized, I think I like do it. Like, this is pretty fun. Like, this is ridiculous. I just like come up with whatever story I want to do, and then I draw it, and then it's done, and I've made a comic. I felt like I had left the world when I drew comics, and it didn't matter that I was bad at drawing. It didn't matter that the comics made no sense. When I was making them, I convinced myself that it was enough, that the comics were good, because Scott said they were good, and I believed him. I wanted to believe him. And I got to just sort of fall off this edge into this world that was entirely made by me, which for a depressed, traumatized teenager is a really, really special thing. As I got better at drawing, I got to like build spaces in my comics in a totally new way, because as you get better at drawing, you get better at manifesting the entire massive world inside of you. And I realized in comics, there were no rules. No one told me there were rules, and I acted as if there weren't. I was like, I can be angry, I can be violent, I can be gay, I can be tender, I can be everything I want to be in these little boxes on this paper. And it meant so much to me. And I really knew at that point, I turned 17, I was like, I'm never going to stop doing this. I didn't think I'd ever make any money doing it, but I was like, I knew I would make comics forever, because this feeling of autonomy and this feeling of expression was just, I was hooked. It was too good to ever give away. And it's because of that feeling that I've published 15 books. And while my career has been amazing, there are some very special things that I've gotten out of it that have nothing to do with the graphic novels themselves. And one of those gifts has been Vermont. And that's because when you Google comics school, it's really only one place, or at least there was only one place in 2014. And the place that showed up was the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, Vermont. And I remember thinking, White River Junction, it's a junction. It's gonna be happening. It's gonna be busy. I didn't know anything about Vermont. I was born in California, I lived in New Jersey, and then I lived in Texas. I had lived in all these like bustling, chaotic places. And then I made my way to Vermont when I was 18 for comic school, because I said that whole statement to my parents, it's my destiny to be a cartoonist, I'm not going to college. They were deeply concerned about this and remained deeply concerned until I was famous enough to have a Wikipedia page. And now they're fine with what I do because I'm famous enough in a very niche industry. But my dad bought me a used Subaru because he told me I was going to Vermont. He also told me that it would be a good way to find a girlfriend, and I didn't really get the joke. But it didn't help. Everyone drives Subarus in Vermont, not just lesbians. But still, I got in my used Subaru and headed to White River Junction. I rented an apartment on the internet, I got a job, and I started drawing comics. And Vermont served as my inspiration while I began making books. It was right outside my window, and it was the place where I think I really figured out who I was, and it was definitely the first place I was happy. And I started by making short books about queerness, about castles, cats, space, women, all sorts of stuff. And then eventually making 3 small books that were published in the small press that I got no money for. I eventually used those books as a way to get in with a big publisher, and I made my first graphic novel, which was Spinning, which was a graphic novel about my 12 years as a competitive figure skater. And I did make a memoir when I was 19. You are not done processing things when you are 19. But you know what? Looking back on it now, 10 years later, I actually sort of respect my audacity for just going for it. I really didn't doubt myself. I was like, those 12 years as a figure skater really screwed me up. I should draw it. It's great, and I think this book would have been so different had I actually processed and grown and had the ability to really reflect. But sometimes I think the being still and meshed in what has traumatized you, what has changed you, can be a very interesting place to make a story from. Obviously, you have to take care of yourself, and you have to be able to get through it. But what I did with Spinning was I just drew the book so fast. And again, I never doubted myself. A lot of it was drawn straight to ink. I really didn't even think. I just drew. And a 400-page book appeared. And after that was done, I was like, wow, I'm depressed. Let's go to outer space instead. So after Spinning, I was like, the real world is sad. I'm going to make my own world. And that's when I did On a Sunbeam, which was not supposed to be as long as it is. But I just came up with the idea of putting some gays in space. And that turned into a 500-page book. After that, I made a graphic novel called Are You Listening? About the sort of uncanny valley that is Texas, what friendship is like between queer people who are on very different paths. Because I had the realization when I was making Are You Listening, so many of my books, even though they had queer themes, but they were so about romance. And then I was like, wait a second. I am gay even when I'm not kissing someone. There are other complexities to my queerness. And one of those things is friendship and how we connect with other queer people who we are not dating. So that was all explored in that book, but I wrote about all sorts of stuff. I wrote about trauma. I wrote about hope. I drew a lot of trees. Thanks, Vermont. And my work found its way to enough places that I started drawing comics for The Walking Dead. And when I started drawing comics for The Walking Dead, the one thing I asked was, can I set it in Vermont? And they were like, yeah? I was like, cool, great, awesome. There's a mountain called Killington. And they were like, you can't put that in the book. And I was like, it's real. So I can. It's 40 minutes from where I live. I think it's hilarious. And around me, the comics industry, the indie comics industry, while I'm making all these books, it's blossoming, right? Comics are being published left and right. Queer creators are given a space, right? We're around. We're on lists. We're always on lists that are top LGBTQ books. I'm never on top books. But you know what? I'll take it for now. And so things have been going great in the industry, but not surprisingly, as graphic novels take up more space, there's backlash, right? It's not, it's unfortunate that it's not surprising, but graphic novels are banned all over the country, my books included. My comics have been banned in a relatively few number of states. I believe it's only 5 at this point. And there were 50, so I guess that's better. But my book Spinning has been banned in Texas, which is really surreal for me because that book takes place in Texas because it's all real and it's where I had my first kiss, it's where I first drove a car, it's where I first got my period. And they're like, nope, didn't happen, can't look at it. And it's very strange to think about how you can grow up and be a part of a place and then that place can reject you and reject your interpretation of that. I did a school visit for On a Sunbeam. This is the last time I ever did a school visit in Texas because I was in a rural part of the state. And so far my school visits in Texas had been okay, like Sometimes there was some weird energy about me promoting this like gay space book, but it was fine. And in general, the kids were mostly just bored because they're teenagers and it was fine. But I went to this small school. The bookseller was with me, and I found out after the fact that the principal had flipped through on a sunbeam, landed on the page where the two characters, Mia and Grace, very tenderly and very sweetly, like, mwah, quick peck, nothing too much. And this principal was horrified and immediately said, don't let her in, do not let her speak. But we were already in the building, which she didn't realize. We were like walking in. And so this really strange thing happened where they like diverted us as if we were water going through rocks, where they were like, actually, like on their little like walkie-talkies, like, no, go left, go into this room, go into that room. They diverted the kids so the kids didn't see us, sent us into a room, locked the door behind us, and the only door was an exit door. And it took us about 20 minutes of like knocking and phone calling to realize, oh, they just want us to leave. They want us to get out. The bookseller cried. I did not cry. I was very just sort of like accepting, but also I couldn't process it in the moment. And after that, I told my publishers, I can't go back here. I want to keep making my books. I want my books to be in Texas, but I can't be locked away from children again. That's like, it's too hard for me. And the only saving grace is that the whole book is online for free. So what did they really accomplish? Because it's all there, 500 pages of it. You can read it anytime. And that gave me a little bit of a sense of hope that one of the ways I can reach people when I can't get into their school is through the internet. And I'm a huge proponent of putting an entire graphic novel online for free. Publishers don't love it, but guess which book of mine sells the most? The one that's online for free. I think this kind of sharing and really like putting a whole story out there is just a wonderful thing you can do. And I don't make any money on the website. I just pay for it, and there's no ads, and it will be up till the day I die, and hopefully after. What's interesting about the way indie comics have grown and changed over the last like 10, 20 years is that there are certain pockets that have become havens for cartooning, places where cartooning has really thrived. See mice. But Vermont is one of those places. It's a state with very few people, but for whatever reason, a lot of those people are cartoonists. Allison Bechdel, right? She's there. And Allison's there, but there's a lot of us there. Like a lot of cartoonists live and work in Vermont. And a lot of this is because people go to the cartooning school there, the Center for Cartoon Studies, where I now teach. I also teach in the summer if you ever want to take a workshop. So that happens. People come through CCS, they decide to stay. But Vermont is actually weirdly a state that puts a lot of money and time towards comics of all things. The government has funded these amazing projects that do not really exist elsewhere. Projects like Freedom and Unity, which is a comic that they gave out for free everywhere. That's all about how civics and town meeting day and how like local politics work in Vermont. There's El Viaje Más Caro, which is a book that I contributed to, which is Vermont has a lot of dairy farmers. Not a lot of people realize that the dairy farmers are often migrants from very far away. And they had people go who spoke Spanish, interview the dairy farmers just about their experiences, what life was like for them, and they handed them over to cartoonists who illustrated it. And again, the state of Vermont just sent free copies of this book out everywhere, to libraries, to schools. And they did the same thing with A Whole Lifetime of Firsts, which is a comic where they interviewed female veterans who live in Vermont about their experience of their service. And then they had cartoonists illustrate it just to express in their own words what their experience was. And this is amazing stuff. Support and money and getting distribution is everything to us, right? It's one thing to make a comic, but when someone then gives you money for it and helps you get it in the hands of other people, that is how the magic happens. And Vermont is also the only state that has the position of Cartoonist Laureate. It is an official position. You are sworn in at the State House. I am the state's 5th Cartoonist Laureate. Why not? I'm very proud of it, although when they called and told me, I was like, I'm not from Vermont. And they were like, neither is Allison Bechdel. They were like, it's all good. They were like, are you gonna leave? And I was like, no. And they were like, great, don't leave. And I was like, great, you're the Cartoonist Laureate. And I got to go to the State House and shake the governor's hand, and they were like, you have to give the governor a drawing. So I gave him a drawing. Phil Scott, there you go. Being the Vermont Cartoonist Laureate, I asked the other laureates what they did because I have like something from the little like Vermont Senate thing that is very official, but there's no description of what I'm supposed to do. It's like a legal document, but I asked the other laureates what they did, and they were like, this, that, the other thing. I asked Rick Veach, who was the fourth. I was like, Rick, what did you do? What am I supposed to do? It's a 3-year tenure. And Rick was like, well, I was the laureate of the pandemic. I did a lot of Zoom. And I was like, oh, don't say that, Rick. I don't want to do Zoom. So I was like, all right, well, none of the other laureates are helping me figure out what I'm supposed to do with this position. I will figure it out myself. And I have taken it to mean go around Vermont, spread the good word about comics, which is one of the things I have done with this talk that I am giving you now. And beyond just spreading the good word about comics to the deer and the bears and also the few people that are in Vermont, being the laureate has led me to my next project. And for that, I am forever grateful because you never know where your next book is going to appear from. On a windy, gray day, I met with a lovely man named Christopher Kaufman Ilstrup of Vermont Humanities. He was wearing a little vest that said Vermont Humanities, so I could find him. We went to King Arthur Flower. I was pregnant at the time. We did not check the hours. It was closed. I did not get a croissant, which is very hard when you're pregnant. But it's okay. We just sat outside without baked goods. And Christopher said, I have this story, this piece of Vermont history. I think you should make a graphic novel about it. And I was like, go on. And he told me about Charity and Sylvia. So Charity Bryant and Sylvia Drake were two women who lived together in Weybridge, Vermont. Tiniest town you could ever imagine. So Charity Bryant, she was born in Massachusetts, right here, just outside of Boston. Go Charity. One of 10 children. Her mother died shortly after she was born, just a month after she was born. And her life was challenging in the way that life was challenging for most people in America, in New England, in the late 1700s. Not a lot of opportunities for women, a lot of illness, a lot of death. Her whole childhood was just one sibling after another dying. Somehow she survived. It's shocking that she survived, honestly. But she did. And she realized that at this time, one of the few ways women could do anything with their lives was if they became a teacher. Because it meant you could have a job, control your own time for like a little bit, and you would like teach, and then you'd get married. So Charity was like, great, I'm gonna be a teacher. Charity had a bit of a reputation. She seemed to have a lot of very close friendships with other female teachers, and at first it was no big deal because this was the time of sensibility and romanticism. Like a dear fond friend was a big thing in this era. But her dear fond friends, after becoming dear fond friends with Charity, then said they didn't want to get married. And that was a problem. So all of a sudden, these families start spreading the word that like, this Charity Bryant girl, she's got to go because she is messing with our marriage prospects. So Charity had to leave from all of these small towns in Massachusetts that she had taught in, that her community was in, that her family was in. She needed to go somewhere else because it wasn't hospitable for her anymore. So she decided she would go to Vermont. And this was a time when Vermont was somewhat settled, not very settled. She knew she had a friend named Asaph Hayward who was in Vermont, who had written her a letter and said, anytime you want to come, come. And she took it seriously, and she came. And that is where she met a young woman named Sylvia. So Sylvia Drake was also born in Massachusetts in 1784. And unlike Charity, all of her siblings did not die, but her challenge in life was unbelievable poverty. They had, I can't even express to you how little money they had and how difficult it was for her and her, I believe, 7 siblings to survive. Because there was no money, everyone went off to work. Older sisters working in houses as servants, brothers being sent to forges or places, mills to find opportunities. And Sylvia, the baby of the family, was just left with her mom, waiting for them to come back, for her family to be reunited. And eventually her brother went to Vermont, found a tiny town, made himself important there, married the mill owner's daughter. Great choice, great choice. And then all of a sudden things are looking up for the Drakes, and Sylvia and her mother are whisked off to Vermont. So Charity and Sylvia meet in the town of Weybridge. And I'm guessing you can tell where this is going. But after they meet, love soon followed. So they did. They fell in love, Charity and Sylvia. Even though Charity had been in previous relationships with women, Sylvia had not. But they fell very hard for each other. And they eventually managed to get their own house. This is a very shocking thing in the early 1800s. 2 women in their own house that they pay for. But they did it. They figured it out. They began work as tailors. First, it was that Sylvia was moving in as an assistant, and she was helping Charity with the tailoring. And what happened is they became an integral part of the community. You need clothes. You need clothes fast. Vermont is cold. Vermont is hard. And their integration into the community, their relationships with people were so strong that when it came time, a widow realized she had space on her land, it was the moment for Charity to say, I'll rent it off of you. I'll get my brother to build something there. It was okay. They did it. They built their house. They had a date that was their anniversary, as they said, July 3rd. They marked it as the day for their lifelong commitment. From 1807 to 1851, they lived openly together in their community as a married couple. And if you do not believe me, I have proof of many things. They were listed on their town register as a couple, Charity in the husband part, Sylvia as the wife. Sylvia did do a lot of cooking. And after they died, they were buried together, which is not something that you do for friends, especially in the Christian community of Weybridge, Vermont. It is extremely significant that they were buried together and that their families, which were not very wealthy, paid for a nice grave to be made for them because they wanted to honor them. Again, not something that is done so easily. And there's so many reasons, there's so much about them that I can tell you, but a lot of it is going to, be in the book. Because obviously when Christopher told me this story, I was like, historical lesbians who didn't hide? Yeah, sure. I'll tell a story about that, and I get to draw Vermont more? Fantastic. And my goal with the project is to not only tell the facts of their life, but I really do want to express and try and understand what it felt like to live back then, because I think a lot about how it feels to live in 2024, and I would like to know what it was like to live in 1824, because I think it was hard too, but it was hard in such a different way. But it's also just a portrait of a love that some people think did not exist back then, but clearly did. Queerness is not modern. It is a part of the fabric of the world. And I want to find a way to tell their story that acknowledges that these 2 women lived in a very specific moment in time. There was a lot that came before them in Vermont and in this country, and there was a lot that came after them. I feel a connection to Charity and Sylvia on the days when I'm at home and I'm with my wife, Emma, and our son, Walter, who can now walk since drawing this. I'll put him on the floor in the next drawing. Because we have a place here in Vermont. And Charity and Sylvia did too. And I think that I really sometimes genuinely feel that tether through history. And I think it's just incredible. It makes me feel like I'm not alone, and like none of us are alone, because we've been here the whole time. When I start the comic, which I have started since making this talk, gotta update this, I only have one image of them to go off of. Charity and Sylvia were not wealthy. They didn't have any portraits painted. Cameras were not around until the 1850s, 1860s, so there's no pictures of them. The one thing I have is this silhouette. They paid a traveling silhouette artist to make a very quick silhouette of them. This is very small. It's like this big. That is their hair all around it. Yes, they decorated it. Yes, they hung it in their house. I think that is so cool that everyone who came to their tailoring business had to look at this silhouette of them with their hair around it, with a heart made of their hair. Don't tell me they're not gay. Are you kidding me? A heart made of hair? But this silhouette is just a very small piece of the information we have about them, because through a miracle, all of their papers were saved. After they died, all of their letters, poetry, Sylvia kept a journal for about 5 years. That was very in-depth. I know everything she ate. I know everything she did. I know the days she was sick. I know the weather because she noted it every single day. Cloudy, cloudy, cloudy. But that all of their stuff after they died was like passed along to a relative, and they got really lucky because Weybridge is very near Middlebury, Vermont, and there was a guy in Middlebury named Henry Sheldon who was obsessed with saving things because he thought in the future everyone was going to want to know what was happening in Middlebury in the 1800s. Everyone's going to need to know. He saved everything. So he took their trunk, and it ended up in the basement of the Henry Sheldon Museum. Yes, of course, he made a museum named after him. And eventually one day an archivist stumbled upon all of this stuff, and they realized, like, wait a second, there's a whole story here. And there is a book about them that's wonderful called Charity and Sylvia that I highly recommend. There's no pictures in it, though. That's my job. But I'm very lucky, and I've gone through quite a bit of the archive already. I am very good at reading old handwriting. You got an old letter? Give it to me. I got it. I know how they do it. But what I love about being a cartoonist is that I get to spend my time inhabiting other lives and worlds. And even when I've made comics about myself that are about real things, there is a separation from reality that I really appreciate and that I think is really important. They're drawings. They abide by different rules and structures. And I love that I don't ever have to draw something in a photorealistic way because that's not the point. The point is that it's a drawing. The point is that sometimes it's incorrect. The point is that it came from my hand and now it's on paper. And so while my goal with drawing Charity and Sylvia's lives is to maintain as much accuracy as I can, I want the shoes to be right. I want the chairs to be right. I want to draw their kitchen correctly. But it's going to be shaped by the fact that I'm a gay woman living in 2024. And I have resources and rights that they could not even fathom in their lifetime. I have a child. That's something that's possible now. And Charity and Sylvia never had that opportunity. And so I think it's really special. I think it's special that I get to write this story with this context, that they were this early point in a very long continuum of queer history. A history that, of course, is not finished. Me and everyone else in Vermont, in Massachusetts, everywhere all over the world, doing what we can for our families, for our friends, for all the queer people around us. And I think that Charity and Sylvia probably could not fathom this person at a comic convention talking about them, making a graphic novel about them, this openly gay person. But I think that there are probably things about the future past me, the queer future after me, that I can't fathom. And I think that that's really exciting. Thank you so much. That is the end. Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Normally I would take questions, but I'm really tired. And I have to go back to my table, but if you would like to see me after this, I will be at my table. I have a few books left. Come say hey. I think it's right there, 66A. Thank you so much all for being here, really. I really appreciate it. Thank you.